So our next speaker on water is Dr. Jonathan Sobels. He's a human geographer and he's co-author of the Big Thirsty Australian discussion paper. In 2010, he led a study for the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, covering issues of where people settle, why and what is required to deal with increased needs for water, energy, food, waste management, and carbon emissions in our capital cities. Quite a substantial area to cover. So over to you, Jonathan.
Okay, I would like to thank the Sustainable Population Australia people for inviting me to participate and lead this difficult child, which has finally come to some sort of maturity. The nature of the Department of Immigration study was very much about trying to look at the physical implications of having more people come into the country, as opposed to the economic proxies that have been developed and pushed by government over many years. So that then led me into this area of interest. We have subsequently picked up this notion of water. I first approached it with this idea, well, I wasn't really sure that water was going to be limiting. However, we soon found that the blind spot that Peter referred to was staring out at us, that not one single government paper actually considered population beyond mentioning it as a potential concern in terms of water supply. And so that led me on to my particular part in this presentation is to look at some of the implications for governance, as well as some of the realities of water supply. Now, a note about drought in Australia. We don't understand drought. The current population and right through our grandparents existed in probably one of the wettest centuries in the last 1,000, 1,500 years. 1970s was a period of probably the wettest decade in the 20th century. In the 1970s, populations began to grow very quickly. Suburbanism began in the 50s, continued apace in the 70s. And so you had this coincidence of population growth with wet conditions, with building big dams, building the Snowy Mountains scheme. You know, this was all thought to be possible and normal. No more dam sites exist that can facilitate a large body of water to be used for any of our large cities. The focus on the large cities is because most migrants settle in Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, and that's about half a dozen statistical local areas where they go. So there's a geographic concentration of people. We have to understand that geography plays a strong role in where we get our water, how much it costs. Desal plants began to be built during the millennium drought. The first one was built in Perth in 2006. It now has 3. Part of the problem, because of our recent history of not experiencing real drought in the cities, as opposed to our country cousins, of which I'm kind of one at the moment. We've got 3 rainwater tanks and we're down to shandying with our bore from our garden. We assume this is part of our culture. This is part of our life, our quality of living. You turn on the tap, water will appear. You don't think that it won't. You don't imagine it'll come out dirty. It just happens. And that is one of the principal benefits we have in a country like Australia, that we can actually expect this. It's a phenomenal achievement. Every household has many taps. Taps are the ubiquitous symbol and reality of water supply, an incredibly simple piece of technology at the endpoint of an amazing network of complex engineering. We assume it will happen because the government deems it so. The government decide that we will all have taps and that water will come out when we turn the tap on. The Australian state governments, and it's not the Commonwealth, it's the state governments, deliver the public good, not a private good, a public good of clean, fresh water in volumes that appear unlimited. Because every time they turn the tap on, there's water. Even the mistaken idea of privatising water authorities includes re-regulation and a dividend to state coffers. Where does the water come from? Peter has already covered in some detail, but basically we have rainfall. We have runoff that goes to surface storages. We have percolation that goes into the groundwater. We have a very small amount of recycling from sewage. And then we have technology. 1% less rainfall in Australia in the southern temperate zone translates to about 3% less runoff. In other words, you saw from the graph how Perth's stream flow has dropped off a cliff. Basically, Perth's dams are glorified puddles. The water that is accessible is very small amount, so they've had to go to desal. Stormwater, aquifer storage and recharge. Adelaide and other cities now do it, but it's still a relatively small amount of water. Sewerage, recycled water often goes to horticulture or to golf courses, not into human consumption. And at the moment, there are about 7 major desalination plants for our major cities, at least 43 gigalitres up to about 150, I think it is, for Wonthaggi in Melbourne. So what are the threats to our water supply, and which of these can we actually do something about? Drought. We are likely to see droughts of longer duration than the millennium drought. The historic record of the last 1,000 years says we might get 30 to 40-year droughts. Southwestern United States is currently in about the teens of the drought, 15 years or thereabouts. So droughts are more common than we have been used to. Floods affect the infrastructure, the engineering, the filters, the pollution, all affects our water supply. Global warming, I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Pollution, plastic, bugs, various things, bushfires, all that burned material washing into watersheds clogs up water supply systems. It's dreadful and changes the amount of runoff. Power failures, that could be fairly problematic. Engineering failures happen from time to time. Compliance, people might not change their practices, their behaviours, although the evidence suggests that they do. Lack of maintenance, we're constantly hearing about burst water mains. So we need to maintain those sorts of practices. What does global warming mean? Hotter, drier air and soils, higher evaporation, higher transpiration, longer droughts, less runoff, less groundwater, death of vegetation, loss of habitats, movement of animals and birds is restricted. Heat islands, heat deaths. More power for pumps and air conditioning is required. More restricted sport. Work outdoors is going to be constrained. Loss of autumn rainfall is the main determinant of southern temperate rainfall patterns now. Winds are going to be far stronger and more damaging. That is what happens when you heat the atmosphere by 1 degree centigrade. It can absorb 7% more moisture. It is more dynamic, more volatile. If you can sort of think about what it means to have a cubic kilometre of air 1 degree warmer, what it does to the soil below it, what it does to the vegetation, the people, and the plant and animal life. Now, Peter was talking a lot about consumption per person. Funnily enough, the figures per household per annum work out to be about depending which city and what kind of a season you are having, between 155,000 litres and 190,000 litres or thereabouts used by each household. So every time you see somebody talk about increasing population, you're talking, oh gosh, 2, 3 people per household. So you can multiply the expected water required by the number of households. Most of the important data figures on households rather than individuals per se, because households are where the bills are paid. That's where the water meter is located. In southwest Sydney, there is currently a lot of media about the Sydney Water not being able to supply water to new developments for housing. Gosh, we need new houses. Sydney Water can't supply the infrastructure. Adelaide, oh, we've just got this huge new announcement of 316,000 new people over 10 or 20 years. That's 60, 70,000 households. Oh, we've just got a little development which has got sewage trucks going in and bringing the sewage out, water trucks going in, delivering water. Adelaide residents are going to have to pay $85 extra every household in order to provide the cash for SA Water to go and set up that infrastructure. We are not keeping up. Now, this man, Professor Peter Cullen, was a doyen of Australian water science. Amongst a number of quotations from about 1995 and onwards, he was saying we do not make the connection as a people, or much less as a government, between where people live, how many people live there, and how much water they need. Think about it. We can starve ourselves for a month. So long as we have a glass of water a day, we can still be alive. How many days do you reckon you can go without a drink of water? Anybody? 3. How vital, how absolutely vital is water to our survival? This is a graph I hope you can see. From 2022, ABS projections. Here's the high projection, 1.7% until 2022, and then 2032, and then they think it'll level off a little bit. But we're currently here, 1.8%. We have been growing faster than the projections for the last 15 to 20 years. If, and this is what really interests me about this graph, if we had 0 immigration, because most of our population growth is immigration, 85%. If we actually had 0 immigration, our population would level off rather quickly and be stable. I mean, you could probably put a 1% population, it would just, you could still have immigration maybe at around 70 to 80,000. What it was prior to 2004 for the last 50 years, one question that comes to me is, why does the Commonwealth government assume that the state governments will simply take the projections that are provided by the ABS and governments, Treasury departments themselves? Why is it they think that state governments can supply water to any number of people? I don't have an answer. All I know is there isn't a squeak. Is it possible to live with increasingly limited, and the key here is fresh water, clean fresh water? When we have a drought, we do respond as a community. We're actually bloody good at cutting down our use of water when we can see there's a need. When the government says, hey, we're on level 2 restrictions, we've only got X amount in our dams, we've got the desal plant on. We're good as a community if we have the leadership. What would happen if the millennium drought was still going? Would we be quadrupling our migrant intake, do you think? these 5 cities. Perth has 3 desalination plants working 24/7 throughout the year, right? Not as an emergency backup like what the first one was in the Millennium Drought. Every single day they're tuning out desalinated water. The latest one cost $2.8 billion for 50 gigalitres. Adelaide has one. It was switched on this summer because, well, we're in a drought. That was 100 gigalitres. Melbourne has one, which interestingly costs $700 million a year to maintain in readiness. So think about it. You've got several $billion tied up in constructing a desal plant. You've got to find a site where the brine discharge isn't going to spectacularly destroy a local environment. You need strong currents. You need to be on the coast. Hey, what happens if we get a bit of sea level rise in the next 20 years with storms and extra strong winds? Are these facilities going to be stranded, literally? I mean, 20 years isn't that far away. These things are supposed to go for 30, 40, 50 years. There's a lot of change going to happen in our physical environment in that time. You can see it on the east coast of Australia, writ large, just in the last few weeks. Southeast Queensland has one at 43 gigs. You'd think Brisbane would not need a desalination plant, the Gold Coast. Well, they get droughts too, very severe droughts. They're being overwhelmed by internal migration out of Sydney and Melbourne, and that ain't going to stop in a hurry. The note about Sydney's desal plant, Kurnell, is that it can only supply the southern, the eastern and the southern parts of Sydney. They can't supply Western Sydney. The system of engineering for Sydney's water supply basically runs from west to east. It's all set up to flow from the mountains to the sea. You can't just redirect it. The amount of refiguring would cost tens and tens of billions of dollars and cause untold disruption to transportation, communication, to communities. So where's all the water? How are we going to divvy up the water supply for Sydney as it keeps on increasing population? Do we cope at the moment? Maybe just. So my little sum for for Australia, if we get to the 2051 and we have between 32 and 38 million people, mostly in these 5 regions, that's an extra 850 gigs, as Peter's table demonstrated. That's the low end. Because we've used up all the available other sources of water, and don't forget, recycled water is only rainfall that's been used up in the sewage system. Stormwater is only water that's rained. The only extra source of water is desalination. You would need an extra 15 desalination plants at 50 gigalitres based on what's being established in Perth, at about $3 billion each. So you're talking $50 billion in the 20, 25 years. Is that a cost we need to face? This is the question. Do we have to spend $50 billion to ensure the population can grow for whatever reason? Or could that money not be better used? Because our quality of life doesn't get much better just because our GDP, even GDP per capita, goes up a point or two. So desalination is a really good example of weak sustainability. People talk about sustainability. 99.9% of people using the term have no idea what it actually means. living within your means, being able to continue living without extracting, without ruining something else to provide you with a good or a service. The costs of technology I've just referred to are enormous, both in terms of the upfront cost, the capital cost, but also the ongoing cost. Desalination introduces a point of vulnerability. What happens? What could possibly go wrong if a desalination plant couldn't work and you're in the middle of a drought and you don't have any dam water and your groundwater, your bores are going dry, and all of a sudden you rely almost exclusively on desalination and it stops working? How vulnerable are we? We become more vulnerable as we add more people. It could be, replacement parts held up overseas. It could be power outages, sabotage, goodness knows, sea level rise, lots of things. But we don't have a plan B once we get past desalination. Strong sustainability, on the other hand, how can we obtain what we need within our environment, our physical environment, not our economic one? There is so much cash sloshing around the world, it's not funny. But our physical environment is finite. And I'm sure I'm talking to the converted here. You all realise that. But basically, no new infrastructure is required if we stop growing. No new white elephants need construction. Repairs and maintenance of old systems can be completed. Accessible water will meet existing demand. And we can allow for 30-year droughts. We can allow for those extreme events. But at the moment, we're just pushing the boundary. Perhaps when people talk about resilience, another misunderstood and misused word, by living within our means, we are more resilient. So who says the population can and should grow? It's basically the Treasury Department. I don't believe they are competent to make that decision. This is the sort of thing that they're now talking about, looking at the migration trends over 4 years instead of 1 year. It'll enable migration planning to better align with longer term infrastructure, housing, that's a new one, and services planning across all levels of government. Housing, planning, nowhere water. It's a political document. It's got zero to do with our quality of life, what we experience now. Why should we have to give it up? The economic argument is shot full of holes. So I ask the question, is water a government priority? Government priorities get funding. There is so much good information out there that is completely ignored. Tanya Plibersek was the victim of a much strengthened EPBC Act, Environment Protection and Biodiversity Convention Act, got completely squashed because of politics, because Roger Crook in Western Australia said, oh, my mining mates don't like it very much. Albo said, oh, I like all the seats we won last time in the West. Let's not have this EPBC Act. Load of crap. So since 1992, in all levels of government, there is a set of ecological sustainability development criteria. I suggest to you they are completely ignored. They look nice on paper. They do not get considered in decisions about immigration. Do we have a say? National water reform last year. Yeah, we kind of do. This sort of PR helped shape a new national water agreement. You know, you could go along and have your say. But, as Graham Turner and Poldy point out, there are no sustainable parts of an unsustainable whole. Likewise, sustainability of the system, the whole system, is only as good as its weakest link. There is no sustainable whole that contains unsustainable parts. We have no idea, in terms of governance, how to structure policies that allow all of us to benefit from an appropriate distribution of resources. The economic argument is spurious. Thank you.